All right, let's get into our first topic then, shall we? We're asking whether it is okay for David Lammy to say that the Tories are the wrong class to run Britain. Get your calls in now. The Shadow Home Secretary has said it in an interview with the New Statesman that the Tories are not the class of people that Britain needs to run it now. The Labour Party's full of people, Angela Rayner, for instance. She gets this, that's what he said. He made the comments after attending Trooping of the Colour alongside David Cameron, Boris Johnson and James Cleverly, adding that they are a class of people who have no real sense of the world as it is, whether that's in our own country or the world as we find it today. Nelufar, what do you make of this? Do you think the Conservatives represent you?
Do I think the Conservatives represent me? No. There's a lot that David Lammy said, and I find him to be quite a bombastic, audacious person, to say the least, and he says what's on his mind maybe a few too many times. But in this, I think he's absolutely justified. Why? Well, let's take what it means to be sort of a class, especially when you're the upper class, the elite class, and which is the context he's talking about. It means you conserve power. It means you're part of these private members' clubs that you and I, for virtue of being a woman, or the three of us, for virtue of not being born into a family, have no right to go into, like, for example, the Garrett Club or the Travellers Club. We can't join. And that's where power exercises itself. It's where power meets power and things happen in these private places. Moreover, if you think about things like the PPE degree, right, the politics, philosophy and economics degree, that we've had more prime ministers who have graduated from one university in one course than we've had of both genders.
Which is kind of ironic, because PPE is where this government went wrong quite a bit.
Well, I love this, that you've definitely got the Friday feeling. Yes, they went wrong with PPE, probably because they studied PPE. I think, from what I understand, and what David Lammy's really doing is getting under the skin of people who believe that there are a ruling class who have a right to it, who have a sense of entitlement, and that is not British.
Do you think, Peter, just because you come from an upper class family, a well-off family, that means that you can't run a country, that you don't understand real people and the plight of real people?
No, I don't think necessarily it does, but the problem here with what Lammy has said is that it's the immature playground politics that I wish our politicians would get away from. I want statesmen-like, grown-up people to either be running the country or trying to get into that position to run the country. To kind of lower it to this really immature kind of conversation doesn't help anybody. It's not going to fill any potholes. It's not going to sort the NHS out. It's not going to sort out crime and policing. It's just pathetic. It's time that he grew up. You know, if Labour get in and if he becomes the Foreign Secretary, he will be shoulder to shoulder with the international elites from different classes. And he's talking like this. The man needs to grow up.
I wonder though, Nelufar, if we turn this on the head and we say that it happened the other way around, so James Cleverly saying, oh, well, you can't trust Angela Rayner with anything because she had a child so young, she grew up in a council estate.
We do. They do. It is casually, repeatedly and frequently strapped across newspaper headlines and column inches and spaces on the internet.
I'm talking about another politician directly talking about another party in those terms. But I think not sure we have seen that.
I think we do, and I think I agree with you. There is a sense of distastefulness because what David Lammy's doing is he's saying the quiet part out loud, and that's what we're finding to be the rub here. But based on facts, based on what he's saying and putting into context, he's absolutely right. There's a certain type of person that goes into politics, not because they need it for a job or because they have deeply held views, but because it's a way to gain and attain power. And when that revolving door storm spins around and they get chucked out, as Lord Cameron did, into these think tanks and these focus groups and spaces, that's where they end up making their money.
But your certain type of person comment actually applies to both sides of the House, because look how they behave at Prime Minister's question time.
The both sides can't apply, Peter.
It's so juvenile. If my children had behaved like that over the dinner table, they would be in deep trouble. We need politics and politicians to grow up, get serious and work for the benefit of the country.
I love that, and I think you should stand. I would vote for you. I agree with everything you said, but I also agree that there's a group of people who speak in a certain way, understand things in ways that we aren't privy to, and I think David Lammy's right to call it out.
Yeah, I mean, maybe Nelufar has a point, maybe David Lammy has a point, that actually we've constructed a political system that is a bit of a boys' club, and maybe somebody has to say it.
I've spent time with people that you would class as sort of the upper class Tories, and I've also had the pleasure of spending time with trade union leaders, you know, and they're kind of typified as being sort of who has the grip of power in both those parties. And I've met good and bad and idle and useless on both sets of the
Peter,
divide.
if I may, you've made the point for Lammy. You know that there's a certain type of person that becomes a politician and another class of people that become trade unionists. The point is that has to be disrupted. That has to stop. David Lammy is absolutely right to call it out in this context. And
so we need more David Camerons, the head of unions?
Lord Cameron, just to give him his full and correct title. Lord Cameron, who was called back to government in order to help us out of the current situation that the Tories are in, as you can see him on screen there, he takes every title he is given. He's absolutely lording it up in there, if I may say so. And I think it just goes to show that there is a group of people who in a sense hire themselves. They want people who look like them, who sound like them, who went to the school that they went to, who understands the culture in the way that they do.
It may not even be a conscious
them.
thing. I mean, subconsciously, I think psychologists do research on this all the time, that we affiliate with people that do look and sound like us naturally. It's a comfort thing, so it may not be happening consciously. David, from Lincolnshire, do you think that the Shadow Foreign Secretary has a point here, or do you think these comments were wrong and juvenile?
I can understand why he's made the comments, but no, I think the comments are wrong insofar that the class where you are, it's if you get voted in as a prime minister or a government responsibility, you should then look up or down to where you are. In other words, if you're a high class, you understand all that side of it. You want to come down to the ground level to see where that is. I mean, I help the homeless and mix with business people, so I see both sides. So if that's my job, then that's what they should do. So it doesn't matter what class they are. In fact, it could be an advantage.
I wonder whether maybe these comments weren't directed necessarily at the Conservative Party in general, and actually these individuals, and maybe he feels that these individuals aren't that inclusive and they're not doing, as you say, David, that they're actually blocking others out rather than opening themselves up to experiencing other walks of life.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because I'm not saying the Conservatives or Labour. I'm saying as individuals, you should know what's going on down the bottom and what's going on at the top. It's like having a tin of sweets. If you're giving them all away, then you've got to know how to restock them. So if you're not good on finance from the bottom, you have to learn what to do, you know?
You know, we are talking about Oxford graduates, we are talking about boys that attended Eton. These are some of the best educational establishments we have in this country, and maybe we do need the best and the brightest at the top. Not that I'm saying these individuals necessarily are, but that's one way of looking at it. I wonder though, David, in contrast to what you were saying, that if somebody is born into wealth and has never had to suffer and has never had to look at their bills and work out how they're going to pay something, and is not suffering the cost of living crisis that most people are at the moment, whether you are in fact the person that should be running the country because you don't have the experience of struggle.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying, is that they've got to come down and learn from the people who... You see, there's two kinds of education. There's the education of Eton or Oxford, but there's the education of life. And the education of life is very important in both levels. I'd love a day with the Prime Minister, or a few hours, to show him what goes on at my level, what I get involved with on a daily basis. And I'm sure he would learn something from it, and I'm sure I would learn something from him about how they have to make decisions at the top.
And I'm sure that's true, but I wonder whether looking on at somebody else's life and being told about somebody else's life is the same as actually having experienced it and experienced that anxiety going to bed at night about how am I going to pay that and will the light switch on tomorrow? Is that the sort of point that you're getting to, Nelufar, that actually being born into wealth doesn't give you the scope that you need to run a country?
I'll give you an example, right? So I use myself as an example for both of you. I have travelled up the class ladder faster and further than anyone I know. Okay, so I was a refugee, I was an underclass, I was a nothing, I didn't count. And I've worked my way up through working and through being in the right place at the right time and through who I'm marrying. I'm working my way up the class ladder. So I'm pointing to myself as an example of someone who's experienced class at different levels. And I'm telling you, having sat in those circles that you're speaking of, Peter, but also knowing what it's like to watch your mum not eat because you are eating and you're taking the food from, and knowing that at the age of 10, I'm telling you it matters, because when politicians deal with things on a conceptual level and haven't lived it, they don't know what it's like not to have £100 in your bank account to be able to pay rent. When they've lived that, it gives them a different place from which to draw courage, grace and empathy. And the one thing that this country could do with more than ever is hope, grace, better judgment, and a compassion that I think is lacking within this group.
Well, there are some studies that say that the wealthier are, the less likely you are to have empathy.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't work on an individual basis. That's looking at it very generally, Peter. But do you think that that suggests that maybe David Lammy has a point here?
Well, perhaps see some people who are fortunate enough to come from a position of great privilege and entitlement ought to abide by the saying that only look down upon someone if you're going to help them up. That might be something they ought to listen to.
I just don't think they take that very seriously.
But you don't necessarily have to have come from a background of struggle to be a good politician. I don't think that's a prerequisite. And until we have political discourse that is mature, respectful, grown up, instead of all this knockabout juvenile nonsense that we have to suffer at PMQs during election campaigns, debates and the such like, then the public's trust and respect for these people is going to remain rock bottom like it currently is.
Catherine from Tyne and Wear, what's your view on this?
My view is some of these politicians and all that need to come down to our level, right, and live in our world for like a week or so, and that would do them all good.
I just wonder whether, Catherine, because we hear this all the time, you know, to try and survive on minimum wage, to live in a council house. There is a difference, though, between doing it as an experiment and actually that being your existence. And I wonder whether, even if they did that, whether that would give somebody enough insight to be able to really understand the issues.
Well, I don't know, because I've worked, I do work. Do you know what I mean? I work full time, and it's a hard. It's just bloody. It is really hard.
Catherine, I know, and I can hear your frustration in your voice. And listen, you're not calling for something that I haven't heard before. Lots of people would like certain politicians to be able to try and exist on minimum wage for a month. The point that you have, Nelufar, is that you need to have experience of different classes in order to have gone through them to really understand and to be able to have compassion and empathy. That works the other way, though, doesn't it? So if you haven't had somebody that has gone up the ranks, which is quite an unusual individual to get, then they won't understand how the upper classes work. They won't understand how
I'm sorry.
The finances in that way works.
No one knows better than a single mum who has to make a tiny budget work for her family. No one knows more than a father who has to figure out how to pay for Christmas. No one knows than an individual who has to save up to be able to buy that frock that they want to go to a wedding or something, how to budget. Okay, that's the first thing that I want to say. Second thing is, it's really, and this is where you and I differ, Pete, right? Because you're like, oh, a bit of decorum, please. Let's have everyone playing nicely and being, friendly and being cordial.
Mature,
right.
Respectful.
Right,
Grown
respectful.
Up.
I mean, we're saying the same things roughly. My issue with it is, when you've got an institutional man like the Prime Minister, okay, richest politician to have ever sat in that 1,000-year-old house, okay, Palace of Westminster. He went from going to these extremely institutionalized private schools. Then he went to an amazing, phenomenal university. Then he went and worked at the highest levels of these amazing corporate jobs. And now he's a career politician. The only time that we see Lord Cameron, for example, or Mr. Johnson or Rishi Sunak actually doing normal things is on the campaign trail. He's out trying to play football with his Oxfords on, or, you know, Boris Johnson's there with his floppy hair trying to be the everyman or something. I mean, I find it almost like they're playing costume with the rest of us.
Yeah, but I suppose the question is whether they actually have to be able to do those things.
Of course they do. Of course they do. Because
I can't play football. Does that rule me out being a politician?
You certainly wouldn't play it in Oxford brogues, would you?
Well, I don't have football.
The main problem is, one of the main problems, I really want to hit this home, is you can't only want to go and play football or go to a school or a factory or know the price of milk, which Johnson didn't, by the way. Couldn't tell you the price of a pint of milk. I'm a vegan, I could, right? You can't only want to be interested in those things when you're up for elections, and that's the issue with this.
OK, back to the calls. Chris from Manchester, what's your thoughts on these comments?
Well, I understand his sentiment, particularly with Sunak, because to this day I don't understand how he could ever empathise with anybody being as wealthy as he is.
Really? Well, that's suggesting that nobody with money can empathise. Do you really think that that's true?
No, I didn't say that, Storm. I said I don't think he can. But please, here's the point. Did you know that David Lammy studied law at Harvard?
I didn't.
Are you telling me? Right. Well, are you telling me, therefore, that is? You know, I think that's quite hypocritical. Frankly, I don't think from him. I don't think anyone gets to study at Harvard unless they've got some sort of natural break in life, whether that is class-related or not, I don't know. But I doubt that it's fluke. So I think, and I agree with Peter, I think, you know, unless you want a completely robotic society where everybody is and looks the same, you're going to get people from different backgrounds doing different things in life. I think that should be applauded.
It is worth mentioning, though, that I think David Lammy went to a state, I think it was Church of England school, but I didn't know he then went on to Harvard to study law, which is incredibly impressive. But that probably falls into your argument then that he's managed to climb up those ladders, so he has a bit more scope than perhaps somebody that didn't.
I think I want to reiterate something that you mentioned before, Storm, that I agree with more and more as we're having this conversation, which is this isn't about an individual. This is about a group of people that make decisions for me, for you, for Peter, for Chris, for all the callers. The job of a politician is unique because your job is to serve your constituents and your wider country. You're not the head of, I don't know, policy at Deloitte or something, or other accounting firms or audit firms. Your job is to represent the people. So the more diversity, as Chris was mentioning, you can have, the better. We don't have that in our political establishment, not even close. OK, well, and on that note, we shall end this part. Chris, thank you very much. Thank you very much for all your calls.